My name is Hiroshi. I was born and raised in Tokyo. Growing up in a small town in Japan, I grew up in a family very attached to traditions. My parents have always been firmly committed to the values of Japanese culture. When I was a child, we spent the summer holidays in the village with my elders, getting up early in the morning and eating traditional Japanese breakfasts, and in the evenings we would sit on porin tatami mats with the family and drink tea. Everything was in order and very quiet. This always gave me peace. However, while studying at university in Tokyo, city life suddenly put me in a very different world. People in the city were in a hurry, together but alone. It was hard to get used to at first. But one day, far away from Japan, I met a student from Turkey. Her name was Asya. Yes, it's weird, I know. I was surprised when I found out your name. But maybe this name was fate in a sense. That moment, it was a coincidence that made me meet him. Asya spoke Turkish very well, but her accent was also sweet. He was such a cheerful, so positive person that I may not have noticed it at first, but he suddenly started to enter every moment of my life. We were working on projects together at school. Over time, we ate together during lunch and finally decided to have an evening tea. That day, our conversation, which started only as a tea break, actually opened the doors to a very deep conversation. Asya told that she grew up in a family with people from all over Turkey, from all cultures. He grew up in Istanbul with traditional recipes from Anatolia, but he also lived in a modern, free city. His interest in different cultures inspired me too. His eyes were shining as he described his love for Japanese culture. But what impressed me wasn't just that our culture was different. On the other hand, it was how he saw life, the world, and people. His perspective gave me a new perspective. That moment, I realized that the distances between cultures are not important to be able to touch a person's life. Two very different people like us could sit together and listen to each other. It was so interesting that sometimes the Turkish words I learned in Japanese, sometimes the Japanese sentences I learned in Turkish were mixed. Words in one language were looking for ways to describe the emotions of another culture. We began to understand each other so naturally and sincerely that over time we really fell in love with each other. But we were so different that I felt how hard it could be to belong to each other. One day, Asya said to me, "Hiroshi, we come from different worlds, but can we create the same world together?" This word really taught me a lot. I believed in how important Japanese culture was all my life, but after meeting him I realized that culture was not just about knowing what was right and wrong, it was actually able to combine respect and love people had for each other. It was difficult to meet Asya's family at first. Although I was very closely attached to the traditions in the house, the presence of a stranger for my parents was quite difficult. The Japanese? How different are the traditions of the Japanese? I came across expressions like very cold people. But Asya's family also had prejudices against me. His family said that Turks were too warm-blooded, emotional, and sometimes too intrusive. These differences constantly hindered us at the beginning of our relationship. But over time, by respecting each other's cultures, we managed to communicate. Although Asya's family slowly accepted me at first, we had to pass the biggest test together for us, the decision to get married. For us, this meant not only loving each other but also the union of two different cultures, two different understandings of life. Asya gave me an offer one day. "Hiroshi, we come from so many different worlds, but can we build a house? It is a place that will include both Japanese and Turkish traditions. And a marriage?" This proposal actually meant both a search and an acceptance. There were not only cultural differences between us but also worldviews. But we wanted to overcome them. Yes, at first our families struggled a lot. Asya's mother, as a Japanese bride, "How acceptable will this marriage be for Turks?" he asked. My mother also said, "Turks don't understand the Japanese enough, be careful." But both sides eventually began to understand and respect. We decided to have a wedding in Tokyo for our marriage. But this wedding would not be an ordinary wedding. We wanted to direct our lives by combining two cultures with both Turkish and Japanese traditions. Therefore, every moment of our wedding was like a cross-cultural journey. The groom was made of Japanese silk fabric, and the wedding dress was embroidered with Turkish fabrics. Among the meals were sushi and kebabs. Our families celebrated these differences, sometimes by forcing each other's tongues and sometimes by joking. The most special moment of our wedding was actually the moment we drank Japanese tea. Both families performed a ritual together there for the first time. We blended the Japanese traditional tea ceremony with Turkish coffee. This was a symbol of our coming together. Two cultures merged together, and at that moment we realized how universal it is to love and respect each other. Today, in the house we live together, we lead a life where Japanese and Turkish cultures come together. In our house, we smell like Turkish coffee every morning and drink Japanese green tea in the evening. Sometimes, while cooking in Turkish cuisine with Asia, sometimes we learn the subtleties of Japanese cuisine. In this world where two different cultures come together, love is actually ahead of everything. Neither differences nor distances can separate us. We set out together to give life to each other as people of different worlds. After their wedding, Hiroshi and Asiya entered an entirely new phase of their lives. As they delved deeper into each other's cultures while living in Tokyo, blending Turkish and Japanese traditions was no easy feat, but with every challenge, they found themselves growing closer. Their wedding had gone exactly as they had imagined, and now they were creating beautiful memories of that day every day in their home. In the beginning, there were still some tensions between the families. Asiya's mother wanted her son to follow the Japanese cultural practices, to uphold the family's traditions. On the other hand, Hiroshi's family often saw Turkish traditions as a challenge to their own. But over time, these differences transformed into opportunities for both sides to understand just how much they valued each other. One day, Hiroshi's mother said to Asiya, "Since the day I met you, I've started to truly appreciate Japanese traditions, the kindness and patience, and the deeper meaning of life. And with Turkish cuisine, I feel more connected with each passing day. When we're all together in our home, I realize how much more beautiful everything becomes." When Asiya heard this, she was deeply moved. They were no longer just respecting each other's cultures, they were actively celebrating their differences together. Hiroshi's family had come to understand Turkish hospitality more deeply. In fact, when they were introduced to Turkish food, Hiroshi's father said to Asiya, "I've never had a meal this delicious before." Turkish cuisine is truly special. Over time, they built a mixed-culture life in Tokyo. Every week, they'd visit a Turkish market, and the following week, they'd go to Japanese temples to enjoy traditional tea ceremonies. They were learning each other's languages more fluently, and moving between Turkish and Japanese, they could feel more deeply how love transcends language. A year later, they began preparing for the arrival of their baby. They wanted to throw a celebration where both Turkish and Japanese traditions would come together. Like a traditional Turkish wedding, they planned a large family dinner, and they'd also have a customary Japanese baby bath ceremony with traditional Japanese clothing for the baby. In the process, they realized that different traditions didn't compete with one another, they complemented each other. No culture was superior to the other, each was special and valuable in its own way. And Hiroshi and Asiya began to create their own little world by blending these traditions. Eventually, their child was born, a baby who carried the marks of both Turkish and Japanese cultures. One morning, Hiroshi's mother met her grandchild, and with tears in her eyes, she said, "This child is everything to us. She carries the best parts of both Asiya's family and ours. No matter how different we are, in the end, we're all human, and we all share the same world." In that moment, Asiya and Hiroshi looked at each other, their eyes filled with nothing but love. The life they had built together proved that the world is smaller than we think, that cultures complement each other, and that true love can overcome any obstacle.